Chapter 2: Waking the Dead. I traveled south from Windhelm, cursing the cold as I went. While I loved the setting and the story of this world, I hated the cold more than anything else. My armor had temperature control among its advanced properties, but Skyrim's biting cold still managed to bite through at points. I made a mental note to buy a cloak to help against the weather at my first opportunity. The trek was rather uneventful, apart from a few wolves and a large spider. I passed by a few merchants and patrols who each greeted me and continued on their way. It was pleasant. I chose the first location that I would head to based on rumors. While I had rescued Ulfric and some of his men from the gallows at Helgen, word of a dragon attack still reached Windhelm. It would seem that Alduin had returned and attacked the town, regardless of whether or not the prisoner caravan actually arrived or not. I kept that in mind as I worked my way south. After a few days, I reached the town of Kynesgrove. Like all things, it was larger than it had been depicted in the game. There was the inn, of course, but also several other buildings, including a mining warehouse, barracks for the miners who spent seasons in the town, houses for the few local residents, and a small farm. I made my way to the inn and took a seat at an empty table. I ordered a simple meal of soup and bread. One thing could be said for medieval worlds. The food was always hearty and robust. As I waited for my food, I couldn't help but notice another figure off in the corner who pretended to be focused on her meal while she was staring at me. She wore fine leather armor, had blonde hair pulled back into a short ponytail, sharp facial features, and a stern demeanor regardless of how she tried to present herself. When my food was set down in front of me, I put my bread in my soup bowl, took my bowl and mug, and walked directly to the other woman's table. "Mind if I sit?" I asked without waiting for an answer. I sat down and placed my food and drink on the table. "Sorry," she said as she watched me make myself comfortable. "But do I know you?" "No, you don't," I replied as I bit into the soup-soaked portion of my bread. "But you've been staring at me since I arrived, so I assumed you wanted to talk." "My name's Merida, by the way." She looked like she wanted to deny the accusation, but after a few moments she sighed and nodded. "You're right. Though to be fair, you do tend to stand out." I laughed and nodded. "My height, right?" I began digging into my soup. It was a thick collection of diced meat, potatoes, and other various vegetables. "That and your arms and armor," she pointed out. "I don't think I've seen armor quite like that before." "I'll take that as a compliment." I grinned, then dipped my bread into my soup. "I made it myself. Were you going to introduce yourself? It's bad manners to sit at a table with someone and not give your name." "You sat down at my table," she protested. "And I introduced myself," I countered. "Where I come from, it's bad manners to not give your name when someone gives you theirs. You like to bandy about courtesy after inviting yourself to someone else's table," she huffed. "You," I started to say before I nearly choked on my food. I motioned for her to wait a moment as I drank my ale to wash the food down. I took a deep breath and pointed at her. "You're the one who was eyeballing me. You may as well have invited me over properly. So, do I get the pleasure of your name, or do we have to keep going around in circles about etiquette?" "Delphine!" she nearly shouted in defeat. "My name is Delphine," I hummed in approval. "See? That wasn't very hard. It's a pleasure to meet you, Delphine. What can I do for you?" She started to protest, but I shot her a look that showed her I knew better. "I might need your help," she sighed. "But I doubt you'd believe me if I just told you what I need your help with." "I think you might be surprised with what I'm willing to believe," I chuckled, before picking up my soup bowl and drinking the rest of it down. Delphine stood and motioned for me to follow her. "I can tell you in my room." I stood and followed her after I left a few coins on the table for my meal. Delphine closed the door to her room once I was inside and went through her bag to pull out a map. She took the map and opened it on the small table near her bed. "Have you heard of the dragon attack on Helgen?" she asked directly. I nodded and looked at the map, smiling at its familiarity. I'd had a copy of it back in my first life and kept it for some time until it disappeared like most keepsakes tend to when you let them sit in a box all your life. "I have," I replied. "Rumors are that there have been more." Delphine nodded and tapped a few locations over the map. "I've been tracking the rumors. Each time they occur near one of these old burial sites. If my guess is correct, the next attack should be near here. There's a burial site just up the hill." "So, what do you need my help with?" I asked, smiling. "If there is a dragon, I'll need your help in slaying it," she responded with a grimace. "Help you kill a dragon, huh?" I grinned with excitement. "That's a pretty big request. I don't suppose you think I'll do this for free, do you?" She shook her head. "No. I expect someone like you demands a hefty price." I nodded and pointed to the map. "It won't be as bad as you think. I just want your map with the location of all the burial sites." Delphine rounded on me and growled, "What? Do you know how valuable that information is?" "Less valuable in your hands than in mine," I said as I crossed my arms. "You're the one who needs help killing these things. Not me. Give me the map, and I'll do the work for you. Also, I'll tell you some information about an old ally of yours after the dragon dies." "An ally of mine?" Delphine paused in surprise. "Who? How do you even know any of my allies? We've only just met." "Let's just say your reputation precedes you," I chuckled. I held a hand out to her. "Do we have a deal?" Delphine looked at my hand and considered the offer. Reluctantly, she reached out and took my hand to shake it. "Fine. You have a deal." I shook her hand firmly and nodded. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go wait for that dragon." Delphine took some time to don her armor and arm herself before we left the inn. Delphine led the way up the hill. The path led past a small farm and ended at a small series of carved stones, which rested against a massive mound of dirt. No plants grew close to the mound or on it, and the mound gave off an ominous air. It was no wonder why people wouldn't build too close to them. That place was silent, and you would be forgiven for thinking that nothing would ever happen here. Nothing did happen either, not for hours. It was dusk when it finally happened. There was a roar in the distance, followed by the slow, methodic beat of leathery wings. We hid ourselves behind some nearby trees when Alduin, the leader of all dragons, the World Eater, finally came into view. He spoke in the dragon language to the mind, then breathed life into the bones buried within. Moments later, a dragon forced itself from the dirt, shook itself clean, then took to the skies. Alduin turned to look at our hiding place and spoke to me directly. I didn't understand a single word he said at first, apart from the word Dovahkiin, which meant dragonborn. Then his tone grew disappointed. "You do not even know our tongue, do you, Ko?" he accused me. "Such arrogance to dare take for yourself the name of Dova." He looked to the newly resurrected dragon and commanded it to kill us, while he took to the skies and left us to our fate. The other dragon circled us until Alduin was out of sight, then began to strafe us, belching its flames to try and burn us. Delphine and I jumped out of the way. My first instinct was to send a stone spike up to skewer the dragon, but I resisted. I weaved my mana together to create a chaotic gust of wind around the dragon, disrupting its flight. The dragon struggled to get wind beneath its wings properly, but my spell made that impossible. It couldn't keep itself aloft and began to tumble out of the sky. It landed with a violent crash in the woods nearby. We sprinted off after it, not wanting to let it get the chance to recover. I activated the Sandavastan mechanism I'd installed in the armor. For me, time seemed to slow down. From Delphine's perspective, I blitzed forward in a blue of motion. I cleared the distance between us and the dragon in a matter of seconds. It was still trying to stand as I sprinted forward. I jumped up onto its tail, my speed from the mechanism still active. The tail was swinging, but from my perspective, it was more like a slow-moving platform. I ran along the dragon's back and stopped between its shoulder blades. I grinned down at the creature. There's a funny thing about dragons from this universe. They weren't actually dragons regardless of what they were called. Dragons have 4 legs and a pair of wings. Nern's dragons are actually wyverns. Unlike dragons, wyverns have 2 legs and use their wings like arms to crawl and move around while they are on the ground. This minor detail is especially important when you're on a wyvern's back and standing between its shoulders, because when you dislocate one of their shoulders, a wyvern can't fly or crawl. I raised my hammer high and brought it down hard on the dragon's shoulder joint. The joint cracked and snapped from the blow. The dragon roared in pain and slumped to the side as the wing could no longer bear its weight. I slid down the dragon's useless wing and dashed away as the mechanism's effect wore off. The dragon limped in pain as I returned calmly, focused on it intensely. Do you know how many times I've done this? I honestly can't even say. But back then, the only real option was to hack and slash at your kind, or fire arrows, or spells. It's nice to have different options. You are no Dova, I will kill you, the dragon roared at me, then belched forth flame at me. I laughed as the flame washed over me. The flames continued for several moments until the dragon had to rest. As the fire died down, I stood there unscathed while the woods around me burned. The dragon stared at me in disbelief. How is this possible? I suppose I should have told you that fire no longer has any real effect on me, I smirked. Your fire is just fire. It's not anything close to nuclear. Here, let me show you. I raised my hand towards the monster and released a concentrated nuclear blast. The dragon's scales, flesh, and innards burned away in an instant. Even as its life was snuffed out, it realized something. Dovahkiin? It shouted in fear. No! As the dragon's bones fell into a crumpled pile. As the pile settled, golden energy swirled from them and flowed into me. Knowledge and power seeped inside me, and I grew in my essence. I felt the dragon's soul empower me, and I couldn't help but revel in the glory of the experience. What did you just do? Delphine asked as she approached the area. Did you just absorb its soul? I chuckled and nodded. Seems like I did. Then that must make you dragonborn, Delphine gasped. I laughed and nodded. I had a feeling I might be. But that's not really something I'm too concerned about right now. I'm more concerned about that map of yours. Delphine stared at me as I dismissed the idea of being dragonborn. Finally, she reached into her pack and pulled the map out to hand it to me. You mentioned that you had information on a friend of mine? I took the map and smiled at it. Thank you very much. As far your ally goes, he's in the Ratways of Riften. His name is Esbern. Esbern? Delphine gasped. Are you serious? I nodded and chuckled. As a heart attack. You'll find him there if you're careful. What about you? She asked as she watched me tuck the map away. What are you going to do? Me? I asked with a grin. I'm going on a dragon hunt.